The bizarre, horrendous stories of the Bakassi squad and the morbid occupation in Anambra could not be overemphasized. They came, they saw, and they conquered. A cold marathon of malevolence that tore the state like a fish gutted with kitchen knife. This entrails that smeared the streets of Anambra till today stank like a 10 days shallow mass grave, beaten by heavy downpour. There were blood everywhere, soaked in the land, both the blood of the innocent and the guilty. The thin line between good and bad undefined in the crucible of the witch hunt that hung as though the Salem witch hunt of 18th century in Massachusetts, United States of America. The streets were littered with human skulls and gummy substances of burnt flesh mixed with eroding asphalt. You could hardly drive freely in the mobile blood-congealed roads, where burnt abattoir of human flesh had covered every space. The banshee of trailed vultures with sharp long beaks, designed to pierce bloated stomachs, hung in the atmosphere. This was state ruled by a kleptomaniac at that point, who had invited blood-sucking demons to sanitize it of lesser thieves. A black pot calling another pot black. All maladministrations necessitate evil consequences. When unemployment becomes rife and a way of life, things fall apart. Corruption and nepotism, augmented by massive exploitation by chief of the state. Then law and order suffered ominously. When the rule of law got tainted with derisive ridiculosity, men turned to animals, and animals devour each other without conscience. This was the sad story of Anambra, a dark age that leveraged on the devious Okija shrine oath sworn by the governor to his godfather. The state became a war front after handing it over to the devil. No place was safe. In the stark afternoon sun, the armed robbers arrived in the market and moved from shop to shop, collecting huge bundles of notes from the horrified traders. They came armed to the tooth and could maim or kill anybody who stood on their way. People from other states began to avoid Onitsha as they carried a bucolic plague. There was total lack of luster in Onitsha, and nightlife was thrown to the wind. You dare not sneak out in the night to return home unhurt. There was no extent of crime that was not permuted, that was not in permutation in and around Anambra State. Then the criminals began to write to wealthy individuals in Onitsha. One hot afternoon, Chief Abel Mofna received a letter from these hoodlums that they were paying him a visit the following week. He was a pragmatic man who had shrewd peasant mentality. Chief Abel was a self-made man who had pushed barrow once in his life and had severely worked very hard to be where he was today. So the letter meant nothing to him. He regarded it as one of those flamboyant histrionics in life that were used on lesser men than him. Therefore, he tore the white writing pad into flinders and let the wind blow the papers out of his large palms from the fourth floor of his massive house. He was short, stocky, with heavy set structure that gave him confidence when dealing with physical matters. When there was no sign of them by Saturday that evening, he felt that he had won. On Sunday, he ran all his village meetings and returned back safely to his house. The night arrived like medieval Vikings on sedge, and he retired comfortably in his large lounge to watch the CNN news and other vital information from the television. He had totally forgotten about the letter and was preparing his body for a full relaxation with a bottle of cold beer. His wife and children had retired in their rooms. When it was some minutes to 12 o'clock, he felt drowsy and switching off all the lights. He rechecked all the security doors and tiredly joined his wife on the bed. He was snoring when he heard the sound of gunfire downstairs. His heart started pounding, and his innards went into frantic churning. He strained his ears, and when the second shot sounded, he became sure it was in his compound. Suddenly, he woke up from the bed, not to disturb his wife, who was snoring beside him. His double-barreled gun lay under his bed, where he had kept it since the letter came to him. There was an ominous caterwauling below, and screams of his tenants reached him as he climbed blindly through the steps to his penthouse. From there, he could see the hoodlums spreading out throughout his compound. There were more than 20 men, well armed and bullying the tenants. He was grossly outnumbered, and the guns also couldn't be compared to his own. One reckless shot will result in giving himself away, so he reclined on the rails of the penthouse and watched the commotion down below. Suddenly, someone was banging furiously on the iron security door in his flat. His heart began to thunder like an angry man's drum as he heard the scream of his wife and his children. A loud gunshot followed, and he heard footsteps inside his flat. There were wild, ominous laughs, and his wife was screaming to high heaven, "Where's your husband?" A husky, whiskey burnt-out voice scratched through the screaming noise. "He didn't sleep in the home, sir. Please don't kill me. He was here with you until midnight. Where is he, woman?" "I don't know, sir." Then the sound of gunshot rang out in the close confine of the flat. It was like the sound of an artillery barrage. It shook the building, and someone screamed once, and there was no sound. "Oh my God, you've killed my son!" Chief Abel heard his wife screaming. A cold shiver went through the chief, and large goosebumps sprouted from the pores of his skin. He wanted to scream, but he controlled himself, the choking in his heart struggling to strangle him. "Where is your husband, woman?" The husky voice snarled again. "I will shoot your second child if you lie to me. He is in the penthouse." "Penthouse, sir." Chief Abel heard his wife screamed. He picked up his double barrel and moved towards the small door that led into the penthouse. He heard footsteps rushing towards him and braced himself. As the door flung open, he released the first incendiary heavy blade of the double-barreled gun. The way they rushed to the penthouse showed they were oblivious of his gun. The heavy bang of the big gun caught the first man unaware. He took him on the chest and flung him down the small steps like a kitchen rag. There was hasty scrambling downstairs and fast movements of footsteps, and they were struggling to reach the doors. Chief Abel released another shot and heard a man scream wildly at the door. "Cowards!" Chief Abel screamed after them. "Come and get me, cowards! You have murdered my son in cold blood." He incited a fresh bullets and rushed after them. The man who was shot at the door was sprawling unconsciously, screaming in loud tones. Chief Abel shot him again, and the scream stopped abruptly. The rest rushed down the stairs and disappeared into the down floors. The story of Chief Abel morphed and arose like a wildfire stormy wind, and soon disappeared with subsequent atrocities encumbering freedom in Onitsha. Cars were commandeered, not snatched anymore. The armed robbers will violently drag you out of your car and use your car for bank robbery. Ransom kidnapping clouded the sky as though vultures waiting patiently to descend on bloating corpses. People learned to keep money in their houses to appease the impunities committed by these hoodlums. It became either your life or your money. Frequent withdrawals of large sums of money became a sign of ransom settlement and were unquestioned by the banks. Most well-to-do citizens fled Onitsha to Lagos in fear of the gross insecurity, and the corrupt government of Chinweke Mbadinju continued to bleed the state with devastating lack of infrastructures and massive thug activities. The rule of law became bastardized, and courts were turned into markets, where negotiation was to the highest bidder. There was no auspicious respite in the cloud, because the governor was sharing the state allocation between himself and his godfather. It was at this egregious point that the Nigerian Bar Association state branch waddled into the obnoxious impunity. They harassed and criticized the governor, who was the chief security officer of the state. When there was no exigent respite, they suspended the governor, who was also a lawyer. Instead of searching for a solution, the governor went into war with the association. He harried his talks and set them against the members of the NBA. These talks were trained professional assailants, flamboyantly equipped to close every screaming mouth of critics in the state. One spectacular event occurred. Between NBA and Barrister Asiegu, who obstinately accepted a commissioner position from the governor. He was ostentatiously suspended by the state NBA for such a crude aberration. This was a man ready to be approved by the NBA for senior advocate position. He was made the commerce commissioner by the embattled governor. His fall from grace to grace further continued after the governor's tenure, which was at the last ebb, when the barrister made a heinous life mistake. The battle was hot, and the NBA refused to shift ground. It's either the governor stops squandering his security allocation, or face the bitter, perfidious criticisms from the association. Wanton criminalities overwhelmed the state, and it became illegal to drive a posh car or enjoy private wealth in Anambra State. At the peak of the skirmish, the governor set his mind to destroy the offensive association. The president of NBA, Barrister Igwe, was on a visit to a colleague at Omaba with his beautiful wife, who happened to be a lawyer too. The wife was 7 months pregnant when the horrendous murder occurred. They were trailed to Omaba by the thugs and were both assassinated in cold blood. It became the climax of the grievous impunity in the state. The government authority denied involvement, likewise all the dubious security outfits terrorizing the state. The killing of the erudite couple became the sacrifice that was needed to invite the Bakassi boys in Anambra State. They arrived in their following red fearful overalls, garbed in charms, and life-crawling tortoise dragged on their necks. Even their appearance was dreadful enough to send the criminals community running for their lives. As they patrolled the streets of Anambra, people heaved a sigh of relief and anticipating that the messiahs had arrived. There was absolute tranquility the first 6 months, and when there was nothing left to do, the Bakassi boys lured into the absurd creation of a red machete. They took the war to the camps of the criminals, smoking them out and testing them with the red machete. Whenever the machete turned red at the tip, it became the sign of a criminal or a wedu. It became the most empirical evidence of criminal, and people dragged their enemies to the office to be tested. Once the machete turned blood red at the tip, the person was dragged to the middle of the road and burnt with tires and fuel. It became the climax of a very witch hunt in this modern country of technology and the judiciary. The dominative slaying line between guilty and the innocent metamorphosed into superstitious judgment of illiterate jungle semi-criminals who had no credible integrity to put anybody to justice. The governor became an infectious hero among gullibles and stark illiterates who eulogized him for work well done. There was no demarcation between good and bad, for envious, unscrupulous individuals discovered a dubious means to end the life of their neighbors. People like Iruka Bread were dragged before the infamous barbarians and tested with the evil machete. Good citizens like Our Lady's bread were measured by the merchant after rumor that she was mixing her flour with human blood. This is the end of Anambra State.